Hello, friends. We'll begin with this lesson looking at Pullman's work. Um, so, for example, here in Great American Nude, it's a 1962 piece. Um, Wesselman was very formal in how he approached his work. I'm going to just pan through and then come back. So one of the things to look at with Wesselman is how he creates generally interiors, and he uses the trappings of what could be hanging on the walls, the furniture, and in this case, a nude woman as well, right? One of the critiques and of Wesselman is that in this case, this woman is objectified as if she might have been a throw pillow. I don't think he looked at her with any agency. She was just a formal matter to be integrated into his painting, which is both a really interesting notion, is that we just are dispassionate completely about subject matter. Um, but then he goes on and kind of celebrates the consumer subject matter, and there is almost a backing away from honoring the woman in this case. So there's some critique um, where I think it's really easy to see what he's accomplishing here. The oranges, for example, in this picture are painted. There is a painted flower pot with actually fake flowers, right? Plastic 7 Up, kind of like half cups, a real refrigerator door, a real tin uh, backsplash to the stove. It was likely an appropriated ceiling. A print of a Picasso above the refrigerator door. So here he's completely acknowledging reproduction, commodification, and consumption, right, as part of this interior. It's both, I think, it's a way of celebrating the culture, the access, the view, all of that, and also um, putting it into a really formally beautiful arrangement. So he's thinking very much about the elements of design and composition here. Here's another one, right? Jasper Johns had done some Ballantine Ale painted bronzes, and we see here a couple of bottles of Ballantine Ale. So there's probably a little fun reference there. Again, we see Coca-Cola. Here we see Piet Mondrian's painting reproduced on the wall, hanging there, right? So you can have your Mondrian and your bananas and wash your hands, right? So this is sort of constructed interiors, these still lives. Here's Great American Nude, number 48. And from a compositional formal standpoint, these are really beautifully arranged. These are like entire scenes. And he was thinking about how do we break from the flat painting and create these kind of vignettes, right? He also did a lot of work with body parts. Later on, he also begins to include male anatomy. But for the most part, at least in the 60s, he really concentrated on using women and the eroticism of lips, breasts, body parts, and often not full bodies. Okay, so it's something to think about with Wesselman, right? He's using the material of the culture, right? Collaging, he's using it. He rarely uses his hand, although here this is a study, he's using his hand, and some of his paintings are, but he's using a very kind of direct application of paint, right? And he's using the source material from the culture. Okay. we're going to go to Klaus Oldenburg, which we've looked at already in class. So I'll skip into a few things. Here was ray gun, right? And there was part of his happenings and the sort of performances where this ray gun wouldn't harm anybody. And here is another version of the store. This is less about the pastry case that we looked at in the class, but here he's making with paper mache all these kind of objects and clothing and hanging them up. And here's another pastry case, or it might be the same one I showed you. Here's a smaller one. Okay. Here's 2 cheeseburgers. Here's a piece from the street performance that he did, right? And so this is kind of foregrounding what we're going to do next unit with performance and such. But I'll skip here to, he's talking about to pick up after a performance and be very careful about what it is to be discarded and what survives by itself. Slow study and respect for small things, one's own created found objects. The floor of the stage is like the street. Picking up after is creative. Also, the particular life of objects must be respected. So in a lot of ways, some of these things might have been part of performances, but then become reclaimed and become the artworks themselves over time. They get archived. Okay? Forget who asked. Are they fluffy, these pieces? These are canvas. They're kind of rough, but they are soft, right? So he's playing with, at different times, hard sculpture and soft sculpture, and the idea of kind of gravity having its own will on a subject, on an object. Okay, so this is a 4 cake. It's pretty big. If any of us would lay down, I think it's bigger than we are. So it's at least 6 feet long there. It's been a while since I've seen this in person. This one's definitely longer than that. This is floor cone. And here's some more, so here's some ones out in the world and different environments. And so Oldenburg's very much pop in that he just takes the images from that vernacular, the everyday, and he sometimes tweaks them and puts them into environments and changes their scale. I think, I want to say Summer might have said that he's doing this in order for us to interact with them differently and to reconsider these objects in our own lives by representing them in this context. So it's an interesting angle, it's an interesting observation, and I think hot water kind of bottle, gigantic stamp, it's a lipstick, kind of in a militant way on like tractor tracks. So he's playing with a few things, right? These are very different. These are hard. These are shiny. They're completely hard and not soft. And they're completely out of context. There's no, safety pin acting as an archway is kind of interesting. Here's a soft light fixture and an ice cream cone on the top of a building turned upside down. A shuttlecock. For those of you who've been to Barstow, right? This is familiar to you. All right. And we'll look at Wayne Thiebaud, who I just realized is really old, right? He's still alive and kicking. He's 97 at this point. It's pretty amazing. And, I think Thiebaud's kind of really interesting because he's using the material of everyday objects. These subjects, right, are very much within the pop vernacular, right? A cake, a Campbell soup can, right? A comic book, a gumball machine. This is all very similar, right, to the pop aesthetic and iconography. What I would encourage you to think about with Thiebaud, right, if we look closely, if we were talking right now, I'd ask you to notice what's happening, right? And you might notice the background has some texture, and it seems like there's some texture to the paint, right? It's far more painterly, right? Andy Warhol, before and after, um, is just using flat paint. Roy Lichtenstein's using the Ben-Day dots, right? Even James Rosenquist is using that kind of billboard technique, right? So it's very flat. But here, let's see if we can look up close. You can kind of see the texture. It's hard for me to blow this up without it getting pixelated, but there is some texture to this, and it's almost like a creamy texture. And he's painting, and you can see the slight modeling of colors all around the edges. So there's a real care to getting the color and the shadows just right. This was not that important at all to Warhol. It was not that important at all to Lichtenstein. Maybe a little bit to Rosenquist, but the thickness and painterly quality wasn't there. All right? So that's something to consider as you these artists.